Yeah, thank you everybody. Zach Hall, I'm an account manager at Rant Rave, and one of our accounts is First Bus, part of the first group, and Melanie is CX director there. A little bit about Rant Rave firstly, and then I'll hand over to Mel, and she'll tell you about the story that First Bus has been on the last sort of 18 months with Rant Rave, and hopefully there's some great learnings in there for everybody here. But in short, who are we? Why do we exist? Our mission is to create ravers. Firstly, of our customers, hence Mel being here, and then ultimately of our customers' customers and our customers' employees. The reason for our being is what Accenture call the switching economy. As you can see, the key stat there is 81% of the times that generally people switch, then the company could have acted. Further to that, 96% of these times, the consumers do not tell the brand after the experience. So it's what we call the silent majority. So a traditional survey approach, 20 questions, 30 questions, they're often business-led. The approach that we take is sort of, and in line with the theme, say humanizing that experience and asking a consumer what matters to them. It's an interesting question, really. How many times have any of, or how often do you take surveys yourselves? I know, being in the industry, I don't take as many as I should do. When you see the ticker bar going from 5% to 10%, and after 5 minutes you sort of click the cross in the corner and get out of there. So, as I say, keeping it simple and allowing the customer to tell you in their own words what matters to them. And again, as I say, it's generally people that are very happy, very unhappy. As we saw before, 96% of those people who leave a brand don't tell them why after a bad experience. So keeping it simple, keeping it in the customer's own words. Traditionally, business-led questions. So there's maybe 20 things that a business wants to understand from a consumer, but ultimately the consumer tells you what matters to them. If you see your friends who've come back from holiday, you're not going to say, how was check-in, how was flight, how was the hotel carpet, for example. You ask them, how was your holiday? And that's the approach that Rant Rave take to customer experience and surveys in general. The clever bit in the background, the sentiment engine, and sort of the free form verbatim analysis is how we deliver the insights to our customers. We work on a basis of 4 golden rules. So keeping it personal. If you have that information on your customers, you don't need to ask it again. I don't need to know that you're Mr. Jones if I already have that data in the background. So cut down the questions that way, keeping it relevant to the interaction that they've just had. You know if they've spoken to somebody in the contact center, or you know if they've been on live chat. Again, you don't need to ask what their latest interaction was, or what their order history or purchase history was, what journey they've just made, for example. In the moment, so as close to real time as possible. Obviously, that increases the level of insight you get from your customers. If you ask me what I had for lunch this afternoon, I could tell you I had some lovely wraps and sandwiches. But if you ask me what I had 3 days ago, then it'd take me a little while to figure that out. And ultimately, the level of insight drops off the further away from the interaction that you ask the questions. And ultimately keeping it low effort. So as I mentioned, going back to keeping it simple, give us a score, tell us why, and let the customer tell you what matters to them. Ultimately, our 4 big points of difference over the sort of other survey companies or feedback organisations out there. Emotion over survey, so asking the question that is relevant to the consumer. Brilliant engagement, so this comes back to putting the feedback into the hands of the front line, so the people that can really make a difference. Ultimately, you don't just want your customer feedback and your insights in sort of the ivory tower with heads of seeing all this great data. The front line are the ones who really can do something about it, and hopefully Mel will share some of those stories with you from a First Bus perspective. Addressing the silent shopper, as I said, the voice of the silent majority. And finally, proactive about communication. So this is the piece that we see as key, really, the action piece. After you've asked for feedback, you need to do something with it. There's really no point asking if you aren't going to do anything about it. And in a nutshell, keeping it short and sweet, that is Rant Rave and why we exist. Bit of a vanity slide coming up. So we do it at a huge scale. Obviously, First Bus being part of the first group, that's a huge organisation spread across the globe, but we do it in multiple countries as well, multiple languages, multiple industries. And yeah, enough of me. I'll hand over to Mel to tell sort of the more interesting stories about what the power of Rant Rave can do when used correctly.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Zach. So when we think about bus travel, we don't necessarily make particularly positive associations with it. So we might think about standing on a really cold bus stop, probably raining, just wondering where the bus is, or waiting for ages, 3 buses come along at once. And when the bus does finally turn up, our expectation is probably you're going to be greeted by a pretty grumpy driver. And you might end up having an interaction a little bit like this one.
Yeah, I've got to get on the bus. All right, let me have these few days. Where have you been?
Yeah, I forgot to put wings on the bus this morning.
What?
I'm not that late, only a couple of minutes. Not bad considering the traffic this morning.
You do know the bus before you just went driving past, didn't even bother to stop. What's that all about?
Well, I don't know, I'm not psychic. Did you make it clear he needed to stop?
Yes, I put my arm out and he just kept driving past.
Nothing I can do about it, mate.
I want to make a complaint.
Yeah? Good luck with that.
Well, come on then, get a move on. Haven't got all day.
Better let these two on now they're here. Hello, ladies.
So when I joined First Bus a couple of years ago now, and was given a brief to increase the customer focus across the business, it felt like quite a nice chunky challenge. Just to give you a bit of context, First Bus carries around 1.6 million customers every single day across the UK. We operate out of 14 separate operating companies. Each one has its own MD and its own leadership team. We have 13,000, or thereabouts, bus drivers, all working remotely, interacting with our customers every single day. And when I joined, we had quite limited customer insight available to us. But what we did know from those customers wasn't great. So they had no faith in the bus in terms of its reliability. They found the service quite difficult to use, especially if they were fairly new to it, trying to find out timetable information, fares, and so on. And in some ways, most damningly, they didn't feel like they had any kind of relationship with First Bus. So, quite a challenge. With no single answer. The problem was we knew that we needed to do a whole host of things in order to improve the customer experience. Fundamentally, we had to rebuild trust in the bus, we had to simplify the service, and we had to build better relationships with our customers. And what was clear to me was that if we were going to build better relationships with our customers, we had to start by building a better relationship with our 13,000 drivers and engage them to make sure that they would do the right thing for our customers. Technology's played a huge part in driving a lot of the improvements that we've delivered over the last couple of years, both for our customers directly and also for our colleagues. And I just want to focus on a couple of these now in terms of the colleagues. So one is a new colleague app that we delivered called First Bus Connect, and the other is a new feedback tool for our frontline teams. So up until earlier this year, our drivers who, as I already said, they work remotely, primarily the way that they got information was through something called a staff notice, literally a piece of paper printed out and pinned up on a notice board in the depot. In fact, all of the information pretty much that they would get, so whether that was their duties, their rotas, information about road closures, diversions, etc., all pieces of paper pinned up on notice boards around the depots. They were pretty busy notice boards, I can tell you. So earlier this year, we launched a new colleague app. Now, it's very much a work in progress. We're adding features and functionality to it all the time. But already we've got over 70% adoption amongst our frontline teams, and that's growing all the time. which is great, because actually what that's doing is making our drivers' lives easier, because what they can do now is find out when they're next rotated to work. They can catch up on depot news, all from the comfort of their own home. And of course, for me, what that does is it gives me a route to access those drivers directly when I want to communicate with them, which is fantastic. Like most big organisations, First Group run an annual staff engagement survey. Quite a long one, sorry, I need to work on that. And last year's survey, over 60% of our frontline teams said that they didn't feel listened to. Now, for me, that was phenomenal. 60% didn't feel listened to. How the heck was I going to engage these people when they don't even feel listened to? So it was very clear to me that one of the things that we had to do as part of this app was get a really good, simple feedback tool for our frontline teams to use. So I worked with Rant Rave to implement what was essentially exactly the same real-time feedback tool that we're using for our customers now, but this time it was to give our frontline teams a voice. Now, because it's embedded in our app, it makes it really easy for our drivers to use it. The results dashboard that Rant Rave provide is great because at a local level, it means that the teams there can really understand what's going on in terms of the mood and morale of the business, and therefore can quite easily identify the actions they need to take. From my perspective, it means that I can look at a divisional level and kind of see the key themes and make sure that I'm building those things into my kind of longer term action plans, if you like. But also, because we've now got the app, it means that the local teams can then go back to the drivers and share with them the key themes of feedback they've given and the actions they're taking. So it's a really nice, simple way of closing the loop with the drivers and helping to build that engagement. So technology has been hugely important in terms of connecting our drivers. But of course, if we're looking to change the hearts and minds, which we have to do if we're going to improve those interactions with the customers, then technology alone couldn't do that. We knew that we had to connect with them at a much more emotional level in order to really start to engage them. So I introduced the Journey Makers program. Now this is essentially a culture change program. And what I'm trying to do here really is drive more focus on the customer and, most importantly, a wider ownership of the customer experience right across the organisation. But for our frontline teams, what it's designed to do is to equip, engage, and most importantly, empower them to do the right thing for the customer that's standing right in front of them. At its heart, Journey Makers is a training program. And our start point with that was about building self-awareness. Getting our drivers thinking about what their natural personality type and style is, how that impacts on how they think and act, how in turn their behaviours might be perceived by others, and how sometimes those perceptions are not what they intended. And to give you an example, a lot of our drivers identify themselves as one of the personality categories, which is called entertainer. So these are guys, they love holding court, they love their storytelling, they love their use of humour, and that's great, but sometimes humour can land badly. And to give you an example of that, and I have had countless tales from drivers of where I was only trying to have a laugh, and the customer complained. But to give you one example, one of the drivers in York said to me that he was one day stuck in traffic, literally gridlocked, crawling along. Crawling, got to the bus stop. Customer got on the bus. Her first words were, "Where have you been?" Now, he could have just said, "I'm really sorry. I've been stuck in traffic. I've been trying to get to you as quickly as I can. I'll do everything I can to get you home as quickly as possible." Unfortunately, he decided to crack some jokes, and he made some quip about, oh yeah, we've all been out for the day in Scarborough. We've been on this great convoy coming back. We're having a whale of a time. I'm sure his delivery was better than mine, but that was the gist of it. And when he told me, he said, of course, customer complained. And of course, what he was trying to do was lighten the mood and make her feel better. But for her, that landed as him being sarcastic and not actually caring about the fact that he was late and she'd been waiting. So those are the kind of things that we work through on the program to get people thinking about different personality types and what they might need out of an interaction. So we're trying to help our drivers, I suppose, read the situation a bit better and kind of adjust their responses accordingly. And it's landed really well, and we've moved on now to create a second training program where we've started then to look at more specific customer needs. So, for example, our second event, one of the things that we do is look at customers with disabilities. So to do that, to try and do it in a more engaging way, I suppose, what we did is we've taken some of our drivers, taken them out to meet some of our customers with different disabilities and filmed them having a conversation. And it is just that, it's a conversation where the customer just talks about their fears and expectations of using the bus and how drivers can help them. And then we use those films back in the classroom to prompt lots of kind of discussion and debate. And actually, there's also some kind of practical stuff in there as well. So, for example, with our second event, one of the things we do is we're teaching all our drivers some basic sign language to help if they have customers that come on who are deaf or hard of hearing. And it's landed really well. The drivers really enjoy it. I think the fact that they get the opportunity to do a bit of self-reflection and think about all that stuff has been quite, it's kind of captured their imagination, I suppose. So it's been really well received, and it's starting to have an impact, which is great. But again, there's lots more to do there, and we've got more courses planned. But again, a day, 2 days, even 3 days of training, we know alone is not going to deliver that sustained change that we need. So that's why I say Journey Makers has training at its heart, but there's more to it in the round. So obviously we use internal comms, so we get lots of messages out there to the drivers all the time, sort of, periodically. And at the moment, you'll see these are some examples of we're running our Smile campaign, where actually locally we're getting people to take pictures, straight face, smiley face, and just putting those posters up around the place, using the app to share them as well, so that people can see that impact that it has on your perception of the person standing in front of you when they're standing there with a straight face versus a smile. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get our bus drivers to smile. So we're using internal comms. One of the most valuable parts of the Journey Makers program for me is my Champions Network. So I launched this when I launched the program. And as I mentioned earlier, we operate out of 14 separate operating companies. So for me, I spend a lot of my time influencing and negotiating right across the patch. And so what I wanted to do was have those local operating companies identify somebody in their business that they felt was a real role model for what we were trying to do with Journey Makers, and allow them to become a champion and represent their business in champion meetings. So I meet with the champions about every quarter, and then we also have a Yammer group where we share stuff. But these champions, that's not their full-time job. So they know that that's not a job in itself, although it could be. They are, for the most part, they're either drivers or some of them are trainers. We even had one fleet engineer. But they're given a day a week to do champion stuff. And we didn't define what that champion stuff should be, because the benefit for me of having local people doing the champion role is that they know what we're trying to achieve with the program, but they can then use their knowledge of the local landscape to really think about what's going to land best there and how to get the biggest impact. So they do things like they'll do targeted coaching with drivers who perhaps are getting a lot of complaints. They might just do ride-alongs, chat to customers, promote our customer feedback tool that was powered by Rant Rave. Or they hang out in the depot and just talk to drivers, controllers, people about journey makers, about their experiences, how things are going, give them tips. And what's been great is as the benefit of having those people doing that role across the business is starting to be felt, what we've now got is we've extended that network. So now I've got virtually a champion in every depot, so I can start to really broaden and deepen the impact, which is great. So basically, we've done a lot over the last 18 months, and we are starting to see some progress. So we are seeing year on year a reduction in customer complaints, and in particular, I focus on those around driver interactions, but we're seeing a reduction generally in customer complaints. And we've got, let's say, across the board, it's about 10%. I've got some areas where it's as much as a 30% reduction. And we are starting to see our customer satisfaction rising as well. So it's really, it's really encouraging, but there's a long way to go. To be fair, we had quite a low base to begin with. Probably should admit that. So there's lots more to do. The journey continues. We're absolutely not there yet. We've got to really start to use more technology to make our customers' lives easier, make our drivers' lives easier. And we've got to continue to put more effort around really embedding those engagement programs to make sure we get maximum effect. So I thought I'd share with you my key learning from my first kind of 2 years working in transport. It's not rocket science, clearly, but sometimes I think when you're really stuck trying to drive lots of change, it can be really easy to just miss the simple things. So in any organisation, but particularly in an organisation as vast as First Bus and structured in the way we are, you can't rely on top-down communication. So I had to really, from quite early on, get in and listen and engage at different levels of the organisation to really understand what was going on, what the challenges were, and how I could help drive change. When you're driving cultural change, obviously you don't expect instant results, but it's still important to keep measuring and to celebrate every single success you get along the way, because that helps keep momentum and keep people focused on it. The other thing, sorry, I think I've lost my mic. There we go, I'm back, I think. The other thing is to try and distill your message down into something that's really, really succinct, so that you can then create a real drumbeat of that message across the business to just keep it alive. And probably the final point is to just stay positive, and you will get there. There will be setbacks along the way. There will be things that don't work in the way that you expect. But if you keep positive and kind of keep the faith and keep going, you will get there. And finally, I want to leave you with another little video. This one is actually of one of our drivers who earlier this year, when we had all that snow, was stuck in the snow on his bus with some customers. And the reason I want to share it is because for me, he is a journey maker in action. Can I just press again? Oh, sorry. That's not me.
So as you know, at First, we are committed to getting our passengers to work on time and safely. However, today, we've been stuck in this snow for 2.5 hours. So what is a bus driver going to do? He's going to say, oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. Since we've no place to go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Yeah!
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When you talked about your champions and you said that they spend time in depots or on buses and shadowing, is that their sole focus of their role, or do they do that in their, not spare time, but is there time allocated to that?
They're allocated now a day a week. So it's not their job as such. So some of them are drivers, some of them are trainers. But what I've managed to do is get the local teams to release them from their day job, if you like, for a day a week. And we started by trialling this in one business, and our champion there, who I have to say is probably my best champion, he called it Champions on Tour. But as we started to see the benefits, so we obviously spread that across, and so now we've got them all being released a day a week. So we're sort of building on that, and it's I mean, I would love them to have 5 days a week, to be perfectly honest, but I'm working on that.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mel or Zach? Lady here.
Hi, thank you. Really interesting presentation. Really liked it.
You.
I just wanted to ask about, you did a lot of work on the ground with the champions and with the local depots, etc. What were your biggest, did you come across any challenges working across the leadership of the business?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the hardest thing, to be honest, at the beginning was I spent a lot of time out with all of the operating companies trying to understand what their challenges were so that I could try and find my win-win, if you like, to kind of persuade them. But I think what I naively at first, when I launched a program, so when I launched the Journey Makers program, the training element of it, I think I felt like I could do my big rah-rah, get everyone on board, get them going, yeah, this is the right thing to do, Mel, hand it over, and then move on to the next thing almost. But of course what happens is day-to-day life in a depot, all sorts of things get in the way. And so whilst it all started well, the training then started to stall and we lost momentum. So that's what made me realise that I really needed to keep closer in touch with all the businesses, and then the Champions Network is primarily my way of doing that. But I also then started to keep in more regular contact with our operations directors and our training managers, so that I was kind of having conversations at different levels of the organisation to really find out what was going on. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then one more. Is you, James?
Thank you. I'll wait for the mic this time. Hi, James from Barclays.
Hi.
So you talked about measuring results, and we saw a couple of customer measures around complaints and customer satisfaction. I'm just interested to know the impact in terms of like driver satisfaction from really getting their buy-in.
Yes, and the only reason I haven't got a measure up there yet is because we launched the driver feedback tool although we launched it as part of the app, people weren't really using it very much. You'd be surprised, there's a lot of suspicion amongst drivers around, how's it going to be used, and are they going to use it to get rid of me and things. So we've had to do quite a big campaign, which we've just done over the summer and kind of is still going on now, to try and encourage the drivers to use it. But equally what we've had to do is work with all the businesses to make sure that when they do get the feedback, they're acting on it and feeding back to drivers to encourage it. So what I will be doing is measuring then the colleague satisfaction, because ultimately, because I'm using the same measurement, the same tool, feedback tool, for customers and colleagues, ultimately I should be able to show that correlation between my frontline team satisfaction and my customer satisfaction. But I've only got a start point at the moment, so I can't.
So
I'm going to share. Exactly, yeah. As I said, we're on a journey. We're on a journey, definitely.
Well, once again, thank you ever so much for taking your time to come and be part of CX Day. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks.